Life, in its cruelest moments, often blindsides us with circumstances we never could have anticipated. I carry a story, a burden really, that few have ever heard. It's too intricate, too layered with a raw, discomforting shame to readily share. Have you ever felt yourself teetering on a razor's edge, caught between what you know is right and what life seems to demand, not by choice, but by a cruel twist of fate? That's precisely where I stood on that particular day, a puppet in some cosmic play, convinced the universe harbored a perverse sense of humor and I was the unfortunate punchline. It all began on an ordinary, almost forgettable, Saturday afternoon. It was one of those Saturdays, unremarkable in every sense. The kind of day meant for quiet domesticity, for reclaiming a sense of order. I was drifting through a leisurely weekend, the only company being the gentle thrum of the dryer in the laundry room as I tackled a pile of neglected chores. My current task, decluttering my closet, sifting through the years of accumulated fashion to unearth items worthy of donation. Tucked away in the very back, beneath layers of more sensible, adult attire, my fingers brushed against a forgotten scrap of fabric, an old miniskirt. I hadn't worn anything like it in years, convinced I'd long outgrown that youthful, carefree phase. Yet, as I pulled it free, the soft denim felt surprisingly familiar, almost comforting. A wave of memories, potent and vivid, washed over me. It was a relic from a different era, a tangible connection to my youth, a time when confidence felt as natural as breathing, and life was an intoxicating blend of enjoyment and unbridled liberation. On a sudden, inexplicable whim, a playful impulse, I decided to try it on. I had no real expectations, perhaps a morbid curiosity to see just how much my body had changed. But as I gazed into the full-length mirror, a surprised giggle escaped me. The skirt, once loose and daring, now clung to me with a defiant snugness I hadn't remembered, accentuating areas I typically preferred to downplay, and, I had to admit, perhaps a few that were surprisingly flattering. I was still turning, assessing, a quiet experiment to see if it even fit, when a distinct, insistent tap echoed through the house, originating from the front door. Who on earth could that be? I murmured to myself, my voice barely audible above the sudden thumping of my heart. My hair, previously tied back for chores, had escaped its confines and now stood in disarray. I was decidedly not dressed to make any kind of impression, nor was I expecting company. With a sigh, I padded to the door, my momentary amusement replaced by mild irritation. When I pulled it open, there he stood, Brandon, my nephew. He was no longer the gangly boy I remembered. At 22, he had matured into a strapping young man. He was entirely robust, with broad shoulders that strained the fabric of his t-shirt, exuding an air of easy confidence that was almost magnetic. He was the kind of person who could effortlessly command attention upon entering any room. He held a bag of tools, a casual, familiar smile playing on his lips, the kind he always wore. "Auntie," he began, his voice deeper than I recalled. "You called about the leaky faucet?" My mind raced. The leaky faucet. I had completely forgotten that I'd messaged him a week ago, a fleeting thought during a busy day, asking if he could swing by sometime to fix the guest bathroom sink. My face flushed with a sudden, intense shame over my choice of attire. I was mortified, but rather than dwelling on it, I forced a laugh, attempting to project an air of nonchalance. "Indeed, I did. Please come in. The bathroom is just down the hall." He stepped past me, and in that brief transition, I observed him hesitate. His gaze, quick as a flicker, darted towards me, lingering for a fraction of a second too long before swiftly averting, fixing on the hallway ahead. Perhaps it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but an unusual, almost palpable, atmosphere seemed to settle in the air. Brandon began his work on the troublesome faucet, the faint sounds of his tinkering echoing from the guest bathroom. I, meanwhile, retreated to my closet, attempting to resume my donation sorting, but a persistent, odd tension clung to the air. It wasn't negative, not overtly hostile, but it was certainly unanticipated. Are you familiar with that unsettling sensation when someone's gaze lingers just a fraction too long, even as they attempt to mask it with subtlety? I experienced that. Initially, I dismissed it as mere overthinking, an anxious quirk of my own mind. He was my nephew, after all. What else could it be? Yet, as I passed the bathroom a little later, heading to the kitchen to retrieve something, Brandon's voice abruptly cut through the quiet. "Hey, Auntie, may you please come here briefly? I think I need a little assistance." His tone was casual, but a prickle of unease ran down my spine. The subsequent events only deepened my confusion, intertwining it with a growing sense of discomfort. Upon entering the small, tiled bathroom, I found Brandon crouched by the sink, his sleeves rolled up, exposing the strong, tanned expanse of his forearms. He held a wrench in one hand, gesturing towards the faucet with the other. "I believe the pipe is stuck," he explained, glancing up at me, his eyes momentarily meeting mine. "Can you hold this while I attempt to loosen it?" I nodded, a little too quickly, and leaned in to grasp the faucet, trying to keep a professional distance. But the bathroom was truly diminutive, and before I fully registered it, we were almost shoulder to shoulder. I tried to ignore the closeness, the warmth radiating from his arm as it brushed mine while he worked. It was then, as I subtly glanced at him, that I noticed it again. Brandon wasn't solely fixated on the stubborn pipe. His gaze frequently shifted, a quick, almost furtive flicker in my direction, as if he were trying to discern something, to read a hidden message in my expression. It was subtle, undetectable to anyone else, but I perceived it. "Everything satisfactory?" I inquired, my voice cutting through the quiet hum of his efforts, attempting to disrupt the stillness that had settled between us. He looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, a hint of reluctance played across his features before he offered his customary, relaxed smile. My anxious laughter, a fragile attempt to alleviate the tension, filled the small space. "Well, you're the expert, correct?" I prompted. There was no overt pressure, no direct accusation, yet I couldn't ignore the way his eyes lingered for an excessive moment, studying me, before he returned to the task at hand. After what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only a few minutes, he finally managed to loosen the pipe. He straightened up, dusting his hands on his trousers, a satisfied expression on his face. "All done," he announced, that easy smile returning. "Should be as good as new." "Thank you," I managed, striving for an air of nonchalance, though my heart was still thrumming a nervous rhythm. He leaned back against the counter, a casual pose, his gaze fixed on me, an inscrutable expression in his eyes. "You're a lifesaver," he murmured, his voice low. Then, his gaze swept over me, from my disheveled hair to the hem of the miniskirt. "You know, Auntie," he continued, a slow, almost deliberate cadence to his words, "I don't believe I've ever seen you in attire like that before." I froze, my cheeks instantly reddening, with a flush that burned. "Oh, this?" I responded, an awkward, self-conscious laugh escaping me as I tugged nervously at the hem of the skirt. "It's merely something I discovered in the back of my closet, among the items I intended to give away." Brandon remained silent, his gaze unwavering, his eyes betraying an unreadable emotion. Curiosity? Something more? Then he smiled again. But this time, it felt distinct, different from his usual casual grin. It was softer, more knowing, almost as if he understood something I didn't. "It suits you," he said, his tone gentler than usual, a quiet sincerity in his voice that caught me off guard. I was at a complete loss for words, my mind scrambling for a neutral response. "Thanks, I suppose," I stammered, feeling an overwhelming wave of self-consciousness wash over me. I promptly turned to leave the bathroom, hoping to put some much-needed distance between us. But as I stepped out into the hallway, Brandon followed, his footsteps close behind mine. "Auntie," he called out, stopping me in my tracks. I turned to face him, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Yeah?" He hesitated, his eyes searching mine, as if struggling to find the right words. "You ever feel like something's happened for a reason?" "What do you mean?" I asked, genuinely confused by the abrupt, philosophical turn. He opened his mouth, as if to elaborate, then shook his head, forcing a laugh to diffuse the tension. Never mind. Forget I said anything. But I couldn't forget. I couldn't forget the intensity of his gaze, the quiet sincerity in his voice, the unsettling undertone of his words. They stayed with me, an uncomfortable echo, long after he had left that day. That night, the lingering unease of the afternoon refused to dissipate. I was curled up on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels, a desperate attempt to shake off the persistent awkwardness. I tried to rationalize it away, convincing myself it was nothing, that I was simply overthinking the entire encounter. Brandon was family, after all. My own imagination must be playing tricks. But just as I started to settle into a semblance of normalcy, a faint buzz emanated from the coffee table.
My phone.
I leaned over, picking it up, and there it was, a message from Brandon. "Hey, Andy, can I ask you something?" My gaze remained fixed on the screen, a debate raging internally. Should I mention the strangeness of the timing? Why now? Why was he messaging me so late, after such a bizarre interaction? After a moment that stretched into an eternity, I typed a careful reply. "Of course. What's on your mind?" His response arrived almost instantaneously, the speed of it adding another layer of disquiet. "I keep reflecting on today."
And you?
It appeared. Distinct. It astonished me, I suppose. A small flutter, an undeniable tremor, stirred in my stomach. What was he trying to convey? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, my mind racing through potential replies. Ultimately, I opted for a safe, neutral response, an attempt to steer him back to reality. I was merely trying on some old clothes. He received my message immediately. I watched the small typing indicator appear, disappear, then reappear, as if he were carefully crafting his next words. When his message eventually arrived, it utterly surprised me. "You seemed very well. I am sincere in my statement." I stared at the screen, disbelief warring with a rising sense of alarm. My pulse raced. Was this truly a benign compliment, or was there a deeper, more unsettling implication embedded within his words? I was uncertain how to feel, much less how to answer. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally texted back. "Thanks, Brandon. Your compliment is appreciated." I desperately wished that would conclude the matter, that the conversation would simply end. But an instinct, cold and certain, told me it would not. He typed again. "I am uncertain whether to express this, but I experienced a sensation today."
Did you?
My breath caught, constricted in my throat. I was venturing onto perilous ground, navigating a territory I had no map for. Brandon wasn't merely an acquaintance. He was my nephew. Whatever emotions he believed he was experiencing, they were deeply misguided, fundamentally wrong. Yet, rather than dismissing him outright, a strange hesitation seized me. Perhaps it was a flicker of morbid curiosity, or a genuine desire to avoid causing him distress. Consequently, I did not respond immediately, and the typing bubble reappeared, then vanished. I retracted my previous statement to avoid awkwardness. He wrote, followed by a shaky exhale, feeling both relieved and disconcerted. He was confused? Disconcerted? I reassured myself that it was all a monumental misunderstanding, believing that he would eventually move on, that normalcy would be restored. But as I set my phone down, a chilling premonition settled over me. This was merely the commencement of events. The following morning, as I attempted to initiate my day with the comforting ritual of a cup of coffee, still disheveled and reeling from the previous night's unsettling exchange, a sharp knock at the door made my heart leap into my throat. I wasn't anticipating any visitors, especially not at this hour. My stomach churned with a sickening certainty. Upon opening the door, I found Brandon standing there, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He appeared, on the surface, as nonchalant as ever. Yet, there was a palpable shift in his mood. His customary carefree smile was conspicuously absent, supplanted by a serious, almost strained expression that I did not recognize. "Brandon," I managed, attempting to conceal my astonishment. "What are you doing here so early?" He entered without waiting for an invitation, stepping past me with a quiet determination. I was in the vicinity, he offered, his voice low, and thought I would visit. It was a tenuous, almost laughably weak reason. Brandon did not reside anywhere near my area, a fact that screamed at me, but I refrained from confronting him. Instead of addressing the blatant lie, I simply closed the door and followed him into the living room. He sat on the couch, leaning forward, elbows resting on his knees, his posture betraying a restless energy. The air between us was thick, suffocating with unsaid tension. "Is everything all right?" I inquired, forcing a casual tone as I took a seat opposite him, trying to create some distance. He gazed up at me, his eyes probing mine with an intensity that made me squirm. "Regarding last night," he began, his voice softer, "I did not intend to cause you discomfort." I exhaled a slow, shaky breath of relief, momentarily pleased that he was acknowledging the awkwardness, that we might finally be able to put it behind us. "It is acceptable, Brandon," I said, trying to project a sense of finality. "Let us disregard the matter entirely." Nevertheless, he shook his head, a resolute refusal in his movement. "I can't just forget. It pertains to you, Auntie." I meant what I stated. I became immobilized, uncertain of how to reply, how to even process what he was saying. "This is not how family members should communicate, Brandon," and I started cautiously, trying to maintain a calm, rational tone. "I believe you are mistaken. Your emotions are illusory. It is just a reality," he interjected, his tone resolute, yet strangely non-confrontational, as if stating a simple fact. "I acknowledge it is erroneous, and I have been endeavoring to resist." I attempted to dismiss it, yet my thoughts remained consumed. My pulse raced, a frantic drum against my ears. I experienced a tumultuous blend of emotions, astonishment, profound perplexity, and a searing hint of shame. "How did we arrive at this point, Brandon?" I implored, my voice quavering, barely above a whisper. "You must cease this. You are my nephew, and this is inappropriate." He nodded slowly, his eyes cast downward, a flicker of something akin to remorse crossing his face. I understand. I understand it is wrong. But I felt compelled to express my emotions. Suppressing them was tormenting me. For a moment, the room was enveloped in a suffocating silence, save for the faint, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the wall. I was utterly at a loss for words, uncertain how to rectify this impossible situation, or if it was even salvageable. Ultimately, I rose, needing to create physical distance between us, a barrier against the overwhelming intensity of his confession. "Brandon," I said, my voice firmer now, "I believe you should depart. We both require time to contemplate this." He gazed up at me, his face a complex blend of remorse and yearning, a raw vulnerability that was difficult to witness. "Very well," he whispered softly. "But this is not the final discussion we will have on this matter." He departed without further comment, a quiet, almost defeated retreat. As the door shut behind him, a surge of relief washed over me, immediately accompanied by a persistent, gnawing anxiety. As the evening sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across my living room, my gaze snagged on something unusual, the crisp, white edge of an envelope protruding from beneath the front door. My chest instantly constricted, a cold dread washing over me. I didn't need to retrieve it to know its sender. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, tearing open the paper. My heart hammered against my ribs, echoing loudly in my ears. The handwriting was unmistakably Brandon's, neat, methodical, almost meticulous, as if each word had been carefully chosen, weighed for maximum impact. The message, brief yet potent, stated, "Auntie, I know you requested my departure, and I respect that. But I cannot feign that these feelings do not exist. I am not requesting anything. I only need you to understand that if you wish for me to distance myself, I would comply without hesitation. Conversely, if there exists even a modicum of reciprocal sentiment, kindly inform me, as I will be awaiting your response." I stood there, rooted to the spot, gazing at the words. A maelstrom of emotions swirled within me, anger at his audacity, a perverse flicker of something akin to flattery, which instantly brought a wave of shame, and, most dominantly, fear. A multitude of frantic ideas raced through my mind. Is he serious? How could he possibly feel this way? Yet a small, unsettling part of me hesitated to discard it entirely, to completely write off the possibility. I folded the paper, tucking it away in a drawer, out of sight, but undeniably, agonizingly, not out of mind. I desperately tried to convince myself that I would not react, that ignoring him was the optimal course of action, the only sensible path forward. But deep inside, a chilling certainty told me that this was far from concluded. Later that night, as I lay in bed, futilely attempting to coax sleep, my phone vibrated once again on the nightstand. I already knew who it was. Brandon. His message appeared on the screen, a new layer of persistence. Brandon, I understand I previously stated I would not disturb you, but I want confirmation of whether you received my message. I stared at the words, the glowing screen illuminating my dark room, contemplating a response that would definitively end this. Ultimately, I settled on a direct, yet firm, reply. Yes, I received it. But Brandon, this must cease. His answer arrived almost instantaneously, confirming my fears of his relentless focus. It is detrimental to both of us. I will cease if you desire. Please inform me candidly. Do you harbor any feeling for me, even a little? My fingers hovered over the keyboard, frozen. Admitting anything, even a flicker of confused sympathy, would exacerbate the situation beyond repair. But denying it outright felt disingenuous, given the swirling, unsettling thoughts I'd been battling. Consequently, I opted for the only truth I could offer, a final, unyielding boundary. Brandon, you're my nephew. That's all I can say. It was not the response he desired, I knew that much. But it was the only one I could honestly and safely provide. The following morning, I arrived at work with a desperate eagerness, yearning to divert my attention from the unsettling events of the past 24 hours. My job had always served as my sanctuary, a familiar realm where I could immerse myself in tasks and leave personal issues, however complex, behind. However, as I sat at my desk, sifting through a backlog of emails, an unsettling sensation prickled at the back of my neck, the distinct feeling that someone was observing me. My head snapped up and I froze. There, just outside the large office window, stood Brandon. His hands were buried deep in his pockets, his posture betraying a complex mix of conflicted emotions and unwavering resolve. What was he doing here? I murmured under my breath, my chest constricting with a renewed wave of anxiety. I promptly excused myself from my colleagues and stepped outside, desperate to intercept him before he could enter the office and further exacerbate the already untenable situation. Brandon, what are you doing here? I demanded, attempting to maintain a composed, businesslike tone, though my voice wavered slightly. I needed to see you, he stated, his voice quiet, yet imbued with an earnestness that was hard to dismiss. You did not respond to my inquiry last night. Brandon, I reiterated, trying to infuse my words with a finality, this situation is unhealthy. We cannot continue this dialogue. Yet you did not refute it, he remarked, taking a step closer, his gaze intense. You did not mention you felt nothing. I instinctively stepped back, my hands tightening around the strap of my shoulder bag, a defensive gesture. This isn't about emotions, Brandon, I asserted, trying to cut through his emotional plea with logic. It's about morality. Whatever you perceive this to be, it is incorrect. He sighed, raking a hand through his hair, his frustration palpable. I recognize its wrongness. I've reminded myself countless times. Yet I cannot govern my feelings. His words hung in the air, dense and disquieting, a heavy weight between us. I was utterly at a loss for a response, my mind a chaotic swirl of fear and disbelief. I began to turn, intending to make my escape. Auntie, wait, he called out, his voice sharp with urgency. He reached out, grasping my arm softly, yet firmly, a touch that caused me to freeze. My gaze dropped to his hand, then slowly lifted to meet his eyes. There was an unrefined vulnerability in his face, a raw, almost desperate plea that made it difficult to simply walk away. "I am not attempting to ruin your life or complicate matters for you," he stated, his voice tinged with a fragile hope. "I just want clarification on the possibility. If none exists, I shall withdraw. You'll never have to see me again." His declaration, "You'll never have to see me again," struck me with the force of a physical blow. The prospect of his severing all connections, of losing my nephew entirely, caused my heart to throb with a sharp, unexpected pain. Yet I knew, with an agonizing certainty, that perpetuating this impossible situation would only result in further anguish for both Brandon and myself. "Brandon," I said, my voice barely a tremor, "your family, this is all that it can ever be." He affirmed with a slow, deliberate nod. Gradually, his shoulders drooped, the weight of my words settling upon him as he stepped back, finally releasing my arm. "All right," he whispered softly. "I comprehend. I will refrain from interfering." I watched as he walked away, his figure receding until he was swallowed by the bustling street. I experienced an unusual, bewildering blend of relief and sorrow, truly believing that this marked the conclusion, that we could finally progress separately. However, later that evening, a phone call shattered that fragile hope and disrupted everything. Brandon had been involved in an accident. Upon my frantic arrival at the hospital, his words to me there, in that sterile, fluorescent-lit environment, irrevocably altered everything. The call itself had come late in the evening, just as I was preparing to retire for the night. My phone vibrated persistently on the coffee table, a relentless, jarring tremor in the quiet room. When I saw Brandon's name illuminate the screen, my stomach sank, a familiar dread coiling within me. But it wasn't Brandon's voice on the line. It was a woman's, calm and professional, identifying herself from St. Jude's Hospital. "Matthew Medical Center," the voice had stated, cool and professional, "Your nephew has been in an accident. He's requested your presence." Panic, sharp and visceral, seized me. There was no time for questions, no thought beyond the immediate need to be there. I snatched my keys from the hook, fumbling with them for a moment before I had them in hand, and sprinted out the door, the unsettling silence of my apartment replaced by the screech of tires as I sped towards the hospital. Every red light seemed to stretch into an eternity, every distant siren an omen. My heart pounded against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror. Arriving at the emergency room, the sterile scent of disinfectant and the murmur of hushed conversations hit me instantly. My breath hitched in my throat. I pushed through the heavy double doors, my eyes darting frantically across the room, past harried nurses and worried families, until I saw him. Brandon lay on a gurney, stark against the white sheets, a small but angry-looking laceration on his forehead and his left arm suspended in a sling. He looked up as I approached, his face pale and etched with pain, yet his eyes, those familiar, intense eyes, still held their unwavering gaze. "What happened?" I managed, my voice raspy, with a concern I hadn't realized was so potent. He offered a weak, lopsided smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It was just a little collision." "A little collision, Brandon?" I retorted, a surge of irritation mixing with the relief of seeing him mostly intact. "You scared me half to death." I was frantic. He chuckled softly, a dry, fragile sound, then winced, clutching his side.
"I'm sorry, Auntie."
"I truly am. I wasn't sure who else to call." I let out an audible sigh, pulling a plastic chair closer to his gurney and settling into it. "Well, I'm here now. Are you truly okay?" He nodded, a flicker of something softening his tense expression. "Yes, physically I'll be fine. But there's something I need to tell you." "Brandon, now is hardly the time." I started, but he shook his head, his voice low and earnest, despite the lingering vulnerability in his eyes. "No, Auntie, it is the time. I didn't call you just because of the accident. I called because lying there, waiting for the ambulance, I had a realization." He averted his gaze, his fingers nervously picking at the edge of the hospital blanket, his hands trembling ever so slightly. As I lay there, contemplating the terrifying possibility that I might not survive, my mind wasn't on school or friends or anything trivial. My thoughts were consumed by you, by my profound affection for you, and the painful realization of how many mistakes I've made, how much I risked losing you. I tried to interject, to articulate the sudden jumble.